to maybe look around a little at your table, at other tables where people have been playing with things, and just sort of get an idea for what people have done, so we can go in thinking about that. Alright, I just sort of it's small enough that while they're working out the sound problem, I'm just gonna talk. So what I would like you to think about with this play, even as adults, let's start with bodies. For people who had the chance to really engage with the toy and play a little bit, what did you notice about your body that was similar to or different from earlier sessions, which were maybe more work?
I was leaning in instead of leaning back.
Okay, so more focused in here. Other things about body, either the way you're holding your body or even what's going on inside of your body.
Just relaxed.
More relaxed.
I really tuned into myself and I was not.
Say that
I
again.
tuned into myself.
You tuned into yourself.
I wasn't cut off what was going on.
Yeah, and I'm just going to highlight that as, and I'm taking a wild guess here, but as a fellow introvert, that play offers opportunities for socialization, but it also offers opportunities to sort of get centered in yourself. And for people who are extreme introverts, being in a classroom with 26 people all day long can be really overwhelming. And so what play does is it provides a chance for kids who need that space to sort of take it for themselves and recover a little bit before they have to engage in their next social interaction. Okay, let's do that there. I want to stop and sort of talk about the management things of play. So as adults, obviously you did not need little colorful felt boards to mark your play space, right? That was something I wanted to model. I like having that physical marker space, one, because it helps kids define, this is my space, and if they want to work with other kids, they can put their mats together and have a bigger shared space, but then it becomes a negotiated thing. It also mutes the sound a little bit. We already have tablecloths on here, but if you're working on hard desks, having all these building materials out on felt makes it, one, less likely, not impossible, that they're going to go off the table, but also less loud and clicky clackety. And then with kids, I obviously don't do this with adults, I have mats of different sizes that they can use as hard spaces on the floor too for partner work, so they can go around. And again, some people are nervous about play because of the chaos factor. And I'm actually sympathetic to this. I am not a lover of chaos myself. So I like to sort of highlight this from the beginning to say, if a lack of chaos is important to you in your spaces or important to teachers in their spaces, there are ways to incorporate play that is not everyone running around all the time, using materials and making all kinds of noise. Although that's my issue. Okay, raise your hand if people have been talking about soft starts in your districts or areas, or so a few people. Another place where I get resistance to play is people saying, I don't have time for this. And usually I don't do it in pre-K, I do already here if I kindergarten. And one way to think about introducing play is to think that it doesn't necessarily have to happen in your math time, right? It can happen at other parts of the day. So it could happen after recess, it could happen on Friday afternoon, or it could happen as the soft start instead of morning work. And I'm going to play, I hope, a little bit of a kindergarten teacher just talking about the use of soft starts in her.
Okay, so hopefully what you noticed from the video is this kindergarten teacher thinking about using this space when kids are coming into the room as this opportunity to play. And soft starts are relatively new. There's not a ton of research on them, but I have been talking to teachers all over the country using them. And big school districts are collecting data on their own populations. I talked to people, I want to say in Tennessee not very long ago, and they reduced tardies by 1/3 with soft starts because kids were excited to get into the classroom and start the day, as opposed to coming in and sitting down with a worksheet first thing in the morning, right? Teachers were also more relaxed. And when I talk about this, I think about my mother, who was a pre-K teacher, and I was telling her about soft starts. And she was like, oh yeah, Barb and I used to do that. Barb was her teaching partner. We just called it having coffee. And I just thought that was great, right? Like, that idea that like 4-year-olds are coming into the room, their teachers are sitting down at a table, they're drinking coffee, they're talking, the kids are playing with things. Like, what a lovely beginning to the day. There was another school that said their discipline referrals went down after they started using soft starts because kids were less stressed out. They were able to shake off whatever had happened in the morning and sort of start in this new space. And then if you think about like all the jobs teachers have in the morning with attendance and lunch and parents saying, you know, I'm going to pick this one up and we need medicine at this time. Having that space where kids are fully occupied and engaged, where teachers can deal with all that mess, is also like a really lovely transition into the day, as opposed to having them do some task where you're really needing to like push them toward it. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit just about what play is. And interestingly, play is something that not just human beings do. We see it at least across all mammals, maybe across other animals, I don't know. But it is something that is done voluntarily. It's done often repeatedly. People do the same kinds of play over and over again. It can involve bodies or materials. It can be solo or alone, and it's often approximations of whatever the individual is going to do as an adult, right? So like when dogs play, they sort of play fight, right, to practice those hunting instincts. And when people play, they solve material problems, they solve social problems, they're learning all those things to be an adult. And so there is actually a lot of research out there that says play helps academically, not just in math, but broadly in learning. It builds creativity, as you might expect, perseverance. You know, we talk a lot about perseverance and problem solving in mathematics, but if you think about like kids building block structures and having them fall down and then building them again and fall down and building them again, or like series of dominoes and setting them up again, like kids are incredibly persistent during play, and giving them the opportunity to play lets them build that persistence and like react to when something frustrating happens, as it inevitably does. Opportunities for conflict resolution. And then spatial relationships and geometric thinking. So we know that kids who spend more time building with blocks when they're 4 and 5 years old actually perform better on geometry tests as late as 7th and 8th grade. And the more complex structures they build as young children, the better their performance is. And adults can be really critical in scaffolding that block building to make it more complicated. Number sense, kids are very concerned with fairness. So even without any prompting from adults, they're very likely to compare what is more, what is less, what is the same, to count. They do that really automatically, and of course we can encourage them to do more. Oral language, vocabulary, storytelling, as if thinking. And so as if thinking is when we pretend one thing is another. And this matters in math because like all of algebra is based on pretending that x is something else. What if x is 2? What if x is -2? What if x is 0? I have to take this one thing x and think about that. Skill gets developed in pre-K when a kid is playing in the kitchen and they bring a banana on the plate and they cut it up and eat it, and then 3 minutes later they pick it up and they answer it like it's a telephone, right? Like that's as if thinking, acting as if the banana is food, acting as if the banana is a telephone. So we start building that skill in pre-K with kids when we give them opportunities to play. And then problem-solving, memory, executive function. More and more, maybe even more and more in the current context, post-pandemic, we're realizing how critical play is to building things like executive function. And when we are not giving children opportunities to play, they are not building those really critical skills for just like being a human being in the world, much less any kind of content learner. And then for me, like I think most importantly, like going back to this, like if we know that all mammal species have young who play, it's I think, our duty as us as adults in a species to create a space for our young to play. And it's really a rejection of our biological imperative to create spaces for kids where we don't let them play. Like, that is something that a mammal organization or organism on the planet should not be doing. Like, totally aside from whether any research shows it works or not. Like, this is something we know kids need to do because they are young mammals. And so we need to create the space where that happens. Okay. So although we know we need to create the space where that happens, we also know it is happening less and less. Like, kids today are getting far less play than I got when I was in kindergarten, even though when I went to kindergarten, it was only a half day. So even though kids now are in kindergarten twice as long as I was, they are playing for half as long as I did, which if you work in pre-K, you know. This was a study just of New York and Los Angeles of the time spent, minutes spent in pre-K looking at literacy, math, testing, and test prep in kindergarten. And then choice time, which was their play time. And you can see, particularly in Los Angeles, they were looking at less than 20 minutes a day spent in free play time. And I would say that's not far off. Most PKs are hitting higher numbers than that, but a lot of kindergartens are not. Like, I walk into kindergarten classrooms, I don't see kitchens, I don't see toys. Like, a lot of that stuff has been put away so we can, like, do literacy and do math. And I think we have to be working to reclaim that, which is why, like, play is the first essential in mathematics. That we really, in pre-K to grade 3 math, need to see it as essential to the learning of number and space. Okay, so I want to take this opportunity, speaking of the first essential, to have you take a look at it. Hopefully you have that paper there. Go ahead and just read those bullet points and think about what they're asking. Holy cow. All right, so hopefully as you're reading that, what you're noticing is that choice, creativity, social engagement are suffused throughout all of this. Like, for me, like, those qualities are at the heart of play, even as it shows up in different contexts. And so you can think about the little play that you did when you walked in here, which I would think of as free play. So in free play, children or adults make decisions about who to play with, what to play with, and where to play. Adults provide limits only for physical and social safety. So I'm not saying, I want you to build a cube with your materials here, or I'm not saying you have to be partners with this person over here. You can play alone, you can play in a small group, you can play with your same friend every single day. You can play with someone different every day. In free play, we're giving children as much freedom as we possibly can, as long as they are safe, right? And so it is really important that kids have free play every day. They usually get it outside at recess. It would be fabulous if they could also get it for some period of time in the classroom in upper grades, maybe at least every week, if not every day. But it is not the only kind of play. Guided play and what I call playful lessons can also provide a lot of the benefits of play, and they can sometimes feel like easier entry points, especially for teachers in first, second, and third grade who may feel like we can't just start playing, right? Like, you are under the weight of a lot of pressures, and I know how hard it is to move against them. So while I think it is really important in upper grades to do that, I think if the teachers you're working with see guided play or playful lessons as an easier way in, then great, start there. Any kind of play, any amount of play is better than no play. So in guided play, adults scaffold the play through materials, tasks, questions, examples with learning goals in mind. Children may make choices about materials or partners. So there are still some choices that kids can make. But as the adult designing the task, we're thinking a little bit more about what mathematically do I want them to get out of this. And then in playful lessons, the teachers are taking even more of a leadership role. So these are teacher-designed lessons, but they incorporate aspects of play. So children may be able to talk to each other. They may be able to make choices about materials or representations. They may be working with interesting materials. So in this case, it's really not true play because the children don't have a lot of choice or creativity, but we're taking some of those aspects of play and trying to infuse them into the lesson so at least children are getting some of the benefits. So I want to take us through some examples of that. And I said in the little write-up that I was going to focus on geometry today. You could equally do a session focusing on play and number, but I have 45 minutes, and already this is going to be really fast. So broadly, in early childhood and geometry, we're trying to do three things. One is we're trying to get kids to see relationships between shapes. So this square can be broken into two triangles or two rectangles. A square is a special kind of rectangle. We're trying to get them to see attributes. So we want to take kids from when they're 4 to sort of saying, that looks like a square, or that looks like a circle because it looks like a pizza, to being able to talk about the geometric attributes. That's a square because it has 4 corners. That's a circle because it goes all the way around and it doesn't have corners. So we want to teach them to recognize and name attribute. And then the last thing is vocabulary. It's last because it's the least important. But we want them to learn to use those geometric words as they're talking about these things. And all of these things are built in PK3 through exploration and talk. I mean, all of these things are built pre-K through college through exploration and talk, but that's what we're focusing on here. And play is a great space for exploration and talk across these things. So I'm going to play a video in a minute of free play. And I want to say a couple things about it. First is I intentionally chose a 3rd grade video of free play because I don't want the idea to be like, well, in pre-K we do free play, and then by 3rd grade we do only playful lessons, right? That's not how it works. The grade level shapes the kind of play kids are doing, but not whether it's free or guided. That's the opportunities kids get. So this is a free play opportunity in 3rd grade, and I would like you to be thinking about the ways that kids engaging in free play in this classroom are building these geometric ideas of relationship, attribute, and vocabulary.
Okay, you ready? 3 and 1. You can't even.
What to do with that?
Here, we're gonna head downstairs.
Oh wait, you know what?
This is just like a gas station car. There you go. Keep going. What's next?
No, keep tipping over.
So do you have them the right way? Double check and look it, because if it's not standing up, that might mean maybe there's a
Build these.
There you're at. Build these.
Yes, I was halfway there.
All right, you can finish yours.
Marley, what do you make it? Okay, I don't want this one anymore.
Flour.
I'll grab you another one. William, yours give is easy. Don't give me the No, which one did you just do? Flip it over and do that. What? Yeah, we all have to do it. Wait, what card? I'm just gonna build like this massive tower, bro. No.
Yeah. Like the window part of the door.
Imagine being on an island you just bought randomly, and then you just see that. Yeah, just see on to an island, and then you just see a random building. Wait, I did it on
Why don't you turn in your table and talk about what you saw that you think would help kids build geometric ideas? All right, let's come back together. Is there someone who's willing to share something that your group was thinking? What could kids get out of the things they were doing in terms of geometry? Yeah.
We talked about symmetry and balance. A lot of things.
Yeah, lots of building brings up issues of symmetry.
Over here, she made a comment about, she's a math teacher, but she has her own 4-year-old, and she has just said, now her 4-year-old started to play with connected tiles quite a bit, and it's nice to see how when they're looking for shapes of squares, rather than just finding, oh, let's find a square, looking at maybe 2 triangles or something like that, and really looking at matching up those shapes or looking for pairs, things like that, really looking at those math attributes at a 4-year-old level and compare them. Those really help.
Yeah. And for people familiar with the elementary standards, composing and decomposing shapes is a big part of what we do in geometry in early childhood, and it sets up the mental pathways for us to compose and decompose a number, right? And the magnetiles, the pattern blocks, the wooden blocks, the Legos, all of those create opportunities for kids to compose and decompose without anyone assigning the problem, right? And that doesn't mean that the teacher is doing nothing. So we saw the teacher in this video sitting down with the group playing a game. That in early childhood is often a big job of the teacher, right? Like 1, kids have a hard time keeping track of all the rules of games, and 2, kids get frustrated when they play games because they lose and they don't like that. But you know what? That's a really important learning experience for kids, and as teachers, like, we have to be there helping to support them in that experience. And then also, ideally, teachers are noticing the kinds of things kids are doing and saying for at least 2 reasons. One is to scaffold the play toward greater complexity as the year goes on. So the teacher in this classroom talked about how she had a little book of buildings made of blocks. And she introduced that about halfway through the year with the goal of encouraging kids to build more complex structures and also to make that move of going from a 2D representation to a 3D representation. And we saw kids in the video like looking at pictures of things. That wasn't there at the beginning of the year. That was something she introduced when she saw that they were ready for it. So one thing she's doing and watching that. In pre-K, we don't want kids putting together the same puzzles in May that they were doing in October. If they're doing that and all they've done over the years got faster, like, we're not doing our job. Our job is to see what is challenging for them. This is where cognitive demand matters, even with little kids, and move toward a new set of puzzles that's going to ask them to sort of work with more complicated shapes. And then the other thing teachers can be doing is watching their kids to see where they can find connections to lessons, right? So if I know I'm coming into a unit on geometry where one of my formal standards is going to be composing and decomposing, then maybe I can take some pictures while my kids are building with magnetiles and put them up on the screen and use that as a launch to the lesson, which is a great way to connect to what they know and what they're doing. So it provides this sort of experimental lab for teachers to like get a new window into their kids' mathematical thinking. And the last thing I'll say about that is often, at least with the pre-service teachers I work with, they see strengths in kids in these play environments that they do not see in formal lessons. So the kids that they define as struggling at math, all of a sudden are building really complicated buildings and may have solutions to problems that like other children don't have. And recognizing that the kid has that strength and seeing that strength as a mathematical strength is really important for like welcoming all kids into mathematics. Okay. So I want to shift now to guided play. So you started with free play, some people with the pattern blocks, making whatever you wanted. But now I'm going to put some constraints on it as the adult in the room. So you're going to work with a partner. If there's like odd numbers at your table, I don't know, one person can watch, or maybe you can move to another table so they're even. I'll let you work that out as grown-ups. But here are the rules. There should be file folders. You're going to put a file folder up between you so you can't see behind it. And one person is going to create a design with pattern blocks that the other person cannot see. And then, after your design is finished, you are going to describe it to your partner, but you cannot use color words to describe it, and they are going to try and build your design. And when you two think you're finished, you're going to lift up your folder and see if you did it. And if you have time, you can switch and do it the other way. I'm not sure today if we're going to have time for that. But go ahead. All right, I'm going to stop you here with the knowledge that when I stop my pre-service teachers before they're done with this, I almost have like arm revolts on my hands. Like, they will not come back. But what I'd like, I think this time I'm going to stay in a whole group here, but what about this activity, let's start with just playful. What made this activity feel playful?
I got to choose my shape.
You got to create your shape. So there was choice and there was creativity there. What else? You got to engage with another human being. What about the reveal?
It was like exciting to see if they'll match it.
There was like some tension there, right? To find out, like, is this going to match, right? Like when you're solving a math problem on a test or a worksheet, like there might be some tension, but it's not really the fun kind of tension, right? But usually, like if, did anyone get their shapes exactly right as their partner? Okay, so when people get it exactly right, that's super exciting and they're really happy. But also when people get it wrong, often there's like laughter as you realize like what it was that you misinterpreted, right? So whether you get it right or you get it wrong, it is still fun. In part because you're in that engagement with another person, right? It doesn't feel like your mathematical identity is on the line in the work. If something broke down, it broke down in the communication. And if we were doing this in the classroom, we would not do it only once. We would come back and do it again. And guess what? Kids get better at it, right? They learn more words. They learn positioning words. They learn shape words. They realize they didn't have a word for, you know, the difference between the skinny diamond and the fat diamond, but now they do have a word for that. So it develops over time. And this is an activity I do a lot with kids in centers, which gives it that guided play space because I'm not as a teacher sort of moving around monitoring it, but kids are super capable after this is introduced of playing it on their own. But still, it's not free play, right? It's not do whatever you want with the pattern blocks. It's a relatively scaffolded activity by me, the adult, which is why it's guided play. Okay. I was going to show that same video I showed this morning of that pre-K play lesson as an example of guided play. Because of time, I'm not going to right now. But what I'd like you to think back and remember about that is that while the kids were choosing activities, in that video you saw a lot of adult intervention around the mathematics. Can you count that? How many more? How do you know that's more? So I would say like that wasn't a free play space. That was a place where kids were being steered pretty heavily to think about the mathematics. And I want to be clear, that is not a critique. That is great. We should be steering kids to think about the mathematics during guided play. It's just, it's not free play and kids need both. And the kids in that classroom really got plenty of time to do free play in an unguided way and then to do this more scaffolded play. And again, going back to that idea that it's not that in pre-K we only do free play, right? In pre-K we do guided play, we do playful lessons. In third grade we do free play, we do guided play, we do playful lessons. All of those things can happen. Okay, so with our last little bit of time, I want to talk a little bit about playful lessons. I'm not going to do this with you. Even before I actually started, I knew we were not going to have time for this, but you get the idea of this. So if I was going to do a playful lesson using the same materials, I might say, okay, I want you to work with a partner to find 3 different ways to cover a hexagon. And then make a poster showing which shape is half a hexagon, which shape is a third of a hexagon, which shape is a sixth of a hexagon. Write a sentence saying how you know. If the red trapezoid was 1, what would the hexagon be? What about the other shapes? So here you can see I've taken that level of scaffolding up a notch, right? Like there is much less choice here than in the guided play example. It also feels less playful. It feels more like a lesson. It's much more directed by me, the teacher. We are trying to get something done. Like whether I write it on the board or not, I probably have a learning target in mind. But again, that doesn't make it bad. I can still, even when I'm teaching a lesson, think about, well, how can I engage a playful aspect in this lesson? So I can have them use hands-on materials so they can figure things out. I can have them work with a partner so they can have that social aspect and support. I can have them make a poster where maybe they get a little bit of creativity in terms of how they represent their thinking. So even as we move into lessons, we can take the aspects of play that that essential one talks about and think about, well, which of these could I put into my lesson to make it a little bit more engaging for kids? Okay, so then I want to mostly end with one last video. This is, I think, a really beautiful first grade playful lesson.
We're going to use square polydrons, and we're going to lay them out in something called a net. And then we're going to see if we can fold up those sides to make a cube. Do you think I can fold up these sides and make a cube? I want you to think about it for a minute. Let's make a prediction, okay? Put your hand by your heart. So everybody show me what you think right now. I wonder if every time I lay my square polydrons out in a net, do you think it will always make a cube? I'm thinking about it. Do you think it would always make a cube? Will you turn and talk?
Shapes can do it. Not like all of them. They wouldn't have one on this side. So they would be changing it and one is the same.
So first, we have to make our what? Our prediction. All right, take a look at that net.
But anyways, you could tell it was a yes. Because look at, we have two more, right? We put that at the top. That's okay.
Well, yes or no? Did it make a cube? Yes. Then we're going to come over here and make a prediction. All right, so let's make a prediction about the next net.
I circled one. No. Let me try it a different one. The J does not. Hold on. What happened? Wait. Well, it doesn't make cube.
We were wondering if every net, no matter how we laid it out, would fold up to make a cube.
Some of them won't and some of them will. And you just have to build them to see if they are or if they're not.
Oh, what else did you notice?
Some of the cubes didn't have like faces. Some of the cubes were.
So you're saying when you folded up some of the squares that they didn't have faces on? Mm-hmm. Where it was open? No faces? Yeah. Could that be a cube with no faces there? No. All right, boys and girls, you learned a lot today. You did a lot of good thinking and learning, and we're going to work some more with some other polydron shapes, okay?
Okay. So now I'd like you to talk at your tables about what were the playful aspects of that lesson and how did it support the kids' geometry learning. Go ahead. All right, so let's come together here. And what I specifically want to think about is how did the teacher make that lesson a playful lesson? Because just like Allison was saying, like we could implement the essentials in a way that did not enact any of the things we hope kids will like really be in terms of mathematics. This lesson could have been enacted in a way that wasn't at all playful. I guess let's stay together and just think about that. So if you sort of imagine in your own head like the least playful version of this lesson possible, what would that look like? What would it look like to turn this lesson into something that was not playful? Great. So we would take away the materials And we would just like expect kids to imagine it in their own heads or maybe do it from a 2D picture. That would make it less playful. What else could we do to make it less playful? Only the teacher gets the manipulatives. Like we've all seen lessons like this, right? Where the children sit down and they watch the teacher do the thing, who is the person in the room who least needs to do the thing. And I'm going to jump to you next, but if you think about, well, why does that happen, right? Like we can go back to obstacles to joy. Almost certainly why that happens is fear. Either the teacher is afraid, well, I guess the third possibility is there is not enough materials, right, which is a whole separate problem. But mostly it is either the teacher is afraid of classroom management, losing control when the kids are out there doing it, or the teacher is afraid of the mathematics. She's not confident that like folding these things will work or will not work, and she doesn't want to like create this uncertainty of children figuring out things that she's not sure about. So like as we think about working with teachers and why they might be resistant to moving toward more playful versions of lessons, we need to drill down to like, what is that fear that's getting in the way? Because it requires a different response from me. If the fear is classroom management, maybe I'm going to be talking about my maths. But if the fear is mathematics, talking about my maths is not going to help, right? Like this is where that individual, I need to know what's going on. Okay, what was the other, make it less playful?
Making it partners and predicting, so it was like a game for them as partners.
Exactly, yeah. So this lesson was gamified because they had to look at it ahead of time and predict, is this or is this not? And just taking that little bit out and even still having the materials and even still letting them work with partners and just saying, build each shape and see whether it's a cube. That's not a terrible lesson. But by inserting that prediction thing, not only are you doing that predictive skill and you're asking them to picture the 3D object in their head, which mathematically is what we want to do, but now they've got some stake in the game, right? They're either going to be right or wrong with their prediction, which increases that level of playfulness. So like when I work with beginning teachers, one thing I do is like take lessons like this and do this and it's almost always, just for the record, easier to take a playful lesson and ask people to imagine the less playful version than to take a non-playful lesson and to say, imagine how this could be playful. That's really hard for people because they have not had a lot of practice with it. But we can go in this order and then we can start to articulate principles for planning other lessons, right? So having kids work together, trying to gamify it in some way, having engaging materials. Like all of these things work to increase play. So what I would like you to do right now is think about a geometric concept that you might work on for your context. So like if you're in pre-K, like maybe you're thinking about like how can I help kids think about attributes of shapes? If you're in first grade, maybe you're thinking about decomposing and composing shapes. If you're in second and third grade, maybe you're thinking about this move from 2D to 3D shapes and what that looks like. And I would like you at your table, you can either work as a whole table or in two groups at your table, depending on how big you are. Pick one of the two materials at your table and think about how could we use this in some kind of playful lesson. Go ahead and brainstorm, and I'll give you a little more time on this one. So like, let's say 7 minutes, this excessive amount of time. All right, come back. And let's start with a group. I'm hoping that there is one. I'm not 100% sure that used something other than the pattern blocks in your thinking. You used a different toy at your table. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. So we used these 3D foam shaped blocks with the stampers. And we were talking about how 3D shapes are made, what they're made up of. She's a third grade teacher. I'm a preschool teacher. So for my background, I said that I would put this out and I would start telling the kids a story. So I would say something like, at this point only I would have the materials, but I would say, this is a cylinder one day who went rolling and rolled in the mud on the sand pit and rolled onto the paper, and then he hopped in the mud and hopped on the paper, and look, it makes a circle, that type of thing. And then I would give out, after telling a couple, like 1 or 2 stories like that to get the kids engaged, then I would give everyone their own set of those materials and let them make their own stamp pads and tell their own stories. So now they're using the vocab to tell the story. They're using those same words and making it.
Yeah. And I was just talking yesterday to like nationally recognized story problem expert, and she was saying that in pre-K, they've been thinking a lot about how to support the things both kids and teachers are already doing around story and literacy and bring them into mathematics. And that's a really beautiful example. And like one thing we're doing in early both math and science is thinking about like that difference between roll and slide, right? So one thing that I really love about your story is the way it primes kids to pay attention to which shapes roll across the paper and which shapes hop across the paper and which shapes would slide. Like there's a lot of mathematics going on in that moment that you've set kids up to engage with in a way, I would say, that wouldn't be there if you just put the stamps out as part of his center time, right? Which you certainly could do, but they're not going to be thinking about the same kinds of things that you've set them up for there. Did you have a 3rd grade version that was different, or?
Not really.
No,
I was
that's
thinking
fine.
that it could almost cross lines. I mean,
Yeah, well, so I would imagine like the 3rd grade version might be like showing a stamped pad and having with the stamps on the paper and having them figure out which of the shapes made those stamps, right? Because in 3rd grade, we're thinking a lot about which faces on those 3D figures are there. And so that kind of predicting and imagining might be right at their level. And this came up this morning, I don't even remember where anymore, but someone asked, I guess it was with one of the videos, if the kids had been doing that kind of work all the way up through 3rd grade, right? Like obviously if you come in as one teacher and do this, that still can be really powerful and it's great, but it really builds on itself if kids are experiencing that across PK3. And so if they're using the same kinds of materials again and again and again, it's not boring to them, it gets deeper and richer and they can investigate new things. So with materials for me, I think being selective about which ones are really going to benefit you and your kids in your school, and then thinking about what does it look like to use these in pre-K and K, what does it look like to use them in 1 and 2, what does it look like to use them in 3rd grade, and then they're also like less distracting for kids if they've seen them all these times before and they can really engage with them mathematically. Let's get at least one other example with a different kind of material. So who had a different kind of lesson? Great.
She had a wonderful idea of just putting the tangrams in a bag and then having the kids reach in and describe the shape. So that's one of those objectives of
Like the feely bag.
the shape, but what is it about the shape?
Perfect. Yeah, and you could do that with the pattern blocks, you could do it with the foam shapes, you could do it with almost anything in here to do that. It's a really lovely example. Okay. Oh, I went back, so I put up that geometry thing. Okay. Are you sitting in your groups with the people from your district or area, or are we jumbled around now that we've done? Jumbled around? Okay. So there's a lot of questions here where I assumed you'd be sitting with your group, so thinking about context, but that's fine. Let's just, you can think about your different contexts. So thinking about what can we do to support teachers in bringing play into their days? So like thinking about the building that you're in, or if you're like an ISD person, the buildings that you work with, where are there already strengths that you can build on? And one of the things I love about play is it's an opportunity to position our pre-K teachers as experts. These are people who know how to bring play into a day. They know how to do it without creating chaos. They know how to introduce mathematics to it. And it's a really great time for third grade teachers to see they have something to learn from their colleagues who teach younger kids, which doesn't happen often enough. So where is the strength that you can draw on? Where are the needs where you think, oh, this is a building that could really use some more play in its life? Because definitely, like, I walk into buildings and I get that feeling almost immediately, like my chest tightens. I can hear in the hallway already that I'm not going to be seeing play when I go into the classrooms. Which sort of play will seem like the easiest lift for your context? And this is it's really different. I've been in all different spaces where some of them feel like, you know what the easiest thing would be? To just start with one of these soft starts and do free play and then go right into our normal day, which is great. If that's how people want to start, good for them. Other people feel like, well, let's try these playful lessons where it's not so different. So think about your context, which feels like the thing people might be most willing to try right away, because one thing across the essentials, not just with play, that I think is really useful and helpful is to start with the easiest lift. Like, don't start with the hard thing. Start with the thing where people are almost there. Let's like get that one up and running, and then use that success to like build the next thing. And then what materials might teachers need, and how can you get them? And I think what I'd like you to do is I'm going to give you some time to talk about these 3 questions at your table, and then a little time maybe for people to ask questions here. And then the last thing I want to do is give you at least a couple minutes to walk around the room so you can see some of the toys that weren't at your table to see if there are things that you think could be useful for your school or classroom. Everyone had pattern blocks, but then everyone also had a completely different thing on their table. All right, so you can choose which of these questions feels most interesting or productive for you and focus on that. We're probably looking at about 5 minutes here to talk about that in your group. Go ahead. All right, let's come back together here. And I want to give us just a few minutes to ask questions about implementing Essential 1. So like, what are questions that you're thinking about as you think about going back to wherever you're from and trying to get this one off the ground? Yeah. Oh, sure.
Were you asking for questions?
I was asking for questions, yes. Question, as you go back to your context and you're trying to get Essential 1 off the ground, what questions are you thinking about as you engage with that? That's my favorite question. Yeah, so, okay. We have to deal with the assessment climate that we're in, right? Like whether you're in pre-K and you are doing one of these 45-pound portfolios about every child, or you are in 3rd grade and you're dealing with the standardized test, there's something going on here around that, right? And I think this is a case where it's really important to get administrators on board, right? Like, so if administrators in a building are not able to see play as learning, it is going to be really hard for teachers to give it the time and space that they need. Because if they feel like the person who could walk through their door and evaluate them is going to yell at them because children are out of their seat or they're not completing worksheets or whatever the thing is, then we've got a no-go. We cannot be asking teachers to defy their administrators. We simply cannot do that. Like, God bless the teachers who are willing to do that, but that's not something we can ask them to do. So for those of you who are in ISD roles, I think thinking about how do we get administrators involved in these trainings is so, so critical. And then once we have them bought into the idea of children are learning and play, then we can talk about assessment. I mean, if it were me, if it were me, I would say the best thing any school system can do right now is do less assessment. Like, whatever your assessment is, do 20% less of that, and that will be like a big improvement over what we were doing before. But assuming that message doesn't fly, which I have not found that it does, then what I would say is we are going to see results if we engage in this, right? Like, we don't actually have to assess the play. If we make geometric play like part of our soft starts every single day, you are going to see your geometry scores move. Yes, you are. I know that that's going to happen. And it might take an act of faith for a year to see it happen, but it will happen. Then the other thing we can do is make these portfolios work for us, right? So we can take pictures of the kinds of kids things are doing, and then we can talk about what they were talking about and saying and doing as they were doing it. We can have kids do presentations about it. We can have them make posters about it, and all of those things can become part of it. But I really do think this is an administrator problem. Yeah. Always. Okay. I think I'm going to stay here, so if people want to ask me questions, they can. But also, I want to invite you with your last couple minutes to really move around the room and look at some of the materials you didn't get to see, and certainly play with them if you want, but at least see what's out there to see if there's something that might be useful for you in your context. Thanks.